Alright, sorry about the delay. If it's not one thing, it's another. Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. Whoops, microphone should be closer to the face parts. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and we got some more Under Pressure, or The Dragon in the Sea, for you. Let me just real quick skim ahead here. Oh boy, I should have done an extra chapter list last week. Because if I'd done an extra chapter, it would have gotten us right at part 2. Now part 2 is going to be right in the middle. Oops. I think I meant to, and I goofed. Oh well. That's fine. Because I am not reading, what is that, 4 pages? And calling it a day? Nah, we have a bit more time than that. Let's see, where's chapter 8? Chapter 8 ends there. That's how many pages? That's only 20. We can do another chapter. How long is 9? My time is not so free that if it's like a 20-page chapter, I'm not going to be able to do it. I can make that work. I can get us up to chapter 10, probably. It's doable with the time I have available. Okay. I squeeze these in. Usually I can drag them out if I have to, but I'm like kind of OCD about personal scheduling, I guess. Where I need, like, mentally, I need to have like this bracketed out gap. Okay. So previously on, what happened? Oh yeah, dead guy in the air vents. Dead irradiated guy in the air vents. Uh, somebody killed him. Well, he killed himself actually, but he'd been irradiated because somebody locked him in there after sabotaging a bunch of stuff, and he went and he fixed the damage that was done, and then offed himself in the air vents, which was actually a pretty good idea to ensure they'd get that he would that his body would get discovered. I don't remember the guy's name. Doesn't really matter right now. Suffice to say, he's dead. He was security personnel, and somebody really has it in for these sub missions. They really do not want them succeeding at all. Which is why 20 of them have been whacked. Oh, actually, yeah. Okay, that should be perfect, because that'll get us right up to one gap before part 3, and then we can probably do all of part 3 in one go. Scratch that. Part 3 is like 50 pages. 60 pages, sorry. So this is going to turn into a bit of a thing. This was only going to be like 5 or 6 readings, and it's going to wind up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It looks like. That's okay. It's okay. All right. Also, they've technically had combat, so now Ramsey is going to be referred to as his first name. So Johnny, probably. Also, the skipper does not trust him at this point. He is the new guy. He got put through a bunch of security rigmarole. He got shoved on them kind of last minute. The skipper Sparrow, does not trust our protagonist. Which is perfectly understandable, all things considered. Okay. So, let's get cracking. Like the beast of the deep. By the same name. Chapter 7. They dropped the signal squirter in the next watch. Sparrow noted the time, 7 days, 20 hours, 48 minutes from departure, and entered it in the main logbook. He added the position from the Sonoran chart. Sonoran chart? I still don't know how to pronounce that right now. 61 degrees, 58 minutes north latitude, 17 degrees, 32 minutes west longitude. The squirter was set for a 4-hour delay. "Very good, Johnny," he said. There was no warmth in his tone. Ramsay said, "We make do with what we have." "Let us pray that it works," said Sparrow. He looked at Garcia. "But we won't count on it." Garcia shrugged. "It could work," he said, "if anybody hears it." He stared coldly at Ramsay. Sparrow thought, "Joe's suspicious. Oh, Lord, if Ramsay's a spy, he'd key that squirter to a wavelength the EPs are listening to. It'll tell them that we're onto the spy beam, and they'll redouble their patrols." "Am I relieved now?" asked Ramsay. "Until your watch," said Sparrow. He stared after Ramsay. In his quarters, Ramsay brought out the telemeter box, examined the tapes. Sweeping disturbance lines hit his eyes. Now Sparrow was reacting. But what reaction! They reminded Ramsay of a feedback record, each succeeding wave worse than the one before. The whole area from the discovery of the spy beam was a scrambled record of disturbance. The room seemed to grow smaller around Ramsay, pressing in upon him. "Sparrow's losing touch with reality. I'll have to do something. But what?" He took deep breaths to calm himself, forced his mind to orderly channels. "I've been with Sparrow a week. I've observed him in all manner of stress. The big elements should be in my hands by now, enough to make some kind of plan of action. What do we have here?" He made a mental list. "We started out with evidence of rigid self-control, but only after we knew that he could react. There is some indication of religious paranoia. A tendency to paranoiac type was Obe's earlier classification. But there are things that don't fit the pattern. He thinks clearly in a stress situation where you'd expect a breakdown. Extremely masculine type. A leader. But not totally despotic, or even nearly so. And he's a brilliant submariner. At times you'd think the boat was a part of him, or vice versa. That he was a built-in component. Captain, submariner type. Mark 1. Portable." Ramsay's back stiffened. Part of the boat. Mechanical. What better way to describe rigid self-control? He recalled his own feeling of synchronous intermingling with the boat. Fleeting as that had been, one instant in the shack, and then gone beyond recapture. It'd be a strong survival adaptation. Captain, submariner type, Mark 1, portable. That may be closer than I'd imagined. He rubbed at a burning sensation in his eyes, glanced at his wristwatch. 2 hours until his next watch, and he was aching with fatigue. He put away the telemeter, flopped sideways onto his bunk. Almost immediately, he was asleep and dreaming. A giant surgeon with Sparrow's face bent over him in his dream. Little wires, nerves, one here, one there. Soon he'll be built into the boat. Electronics officer, submariner type. Mark 1, portable. It was Garcia's watch. Time log reading. Whoops. I skipped something. No, I didn't. It just doesn't have a break. It was Garcia's watch. Time log reading. 8 days, 4 hours, and 19 minutes from point of departure. Bonnet on standby, dozing on a tall stool in front of the control searchboard. The ram at cruising speed, making 20 knots. Garcia lounged against the guardrail in front of a valve master control, eyes idly taking in the gauges, now and then a glance at the autopilot indicator. The searchboard emitted a soft buzzing. Bonnet's head snapped up. He looked to the green face of the scope at his left, kicked the switch which automatically silenced the ram's motors. They coasted quietly. "What is it?" asked Garcia.
Metal. Big. Coming our way.
"One?
Dunno yet.
Is it an EP?" His hand adjusted a dial, and he looked to a gauge above it.
One. Coming fast like she owned the ocean. In these waters, that means EP. Buzz the skipper.
Garcia pushed a button on the call board. Presently Sparrow joined them, bending his tall figure for the aft doorway. He buckled his belt as he stepped across the control deck. Bonnet nodded toward the searchboard. The ram's deck had been slowly tipping to starboard as she lost headway. Now she was pointing by the nose, and the starboard incline was steep enough that Sparrow had to steady himself on the main grab rail. He swept his gaze across the searchboard, asked, "How far to bottom?"
Too far, said Bonnet.
Garcia, one hand on the valve-board rail, turned toward them. "I hope you decide what we're going to do before we turn turtle. We're almost at a standstill." Sparrow's gaze again went to the search Sparrow's gaze again went to the search gauges. The other sub was less than 3 miles distant, coming fast. As he looked, the detection equipment suddenly resolved its signal into 2 images. "2 of them traveling tandem," said Sparrow. Through his mind sped a quotation from the Tactical Handbook. "Submarines stalking each other under the sea are like blindfolded adversaries with baseball bats, locked in a room together, each waiting for the other to strike."
They're gonna pass inside of 1,000 yards, said Bonnet.
"If they hold their present course," said Sparrow, "and that could be a trick to throw us off guard." "They must be asleep not to they must be asleep not to have spotted us before this," whispered Garcia.
Blech, having trouble with my lips today.
"Their metal detection gear isn't too hot," said Sparrow. He turned to Garcia. "Joe, drop 4 homing torps. 5 minutes delay. Set to swing around in front of them. Then give us just enough push to get underway and take us down to absolute." Garcia's hands moved over the control board, adjusting a vernier, setting a dial. He slapped one hand against a switch, turned to the drive controls. The ram picked up speed slowly, nose pointing into the depths. The deck righted. Sparrow and Bonnet watched the detection gear. "Drift," said Sparrow. Bonnet's hand swept over his drive switch. They floated downward silently. "Give us a little more," said Sparrow. Again the engines took up their slow turning. Garcia whispered, "They're not blind, they're deaf." Sparrow held up a hand to silence him. He glanced up to the big static pressure gauge. 2,790 pounds to the square inch. 2,800. 2,825. Slowly, the indicator hand swept around. 2,900. 2,925. Above the gauge, the flat bronze plates stamped with the ram's weight and specifications. Someone had used red paint to fill the indentations showing pressure limit. 3,010 pounds. The hand of the dial pointed to 2,975. 3,000. Perspiration stood out on Garcia's face. Bonnet pulled nervously at an earlobe. Sparrow stood impassively, feeling the boat around him. "Ease her off," he whispered. He wet his lips with his tongue. The knowledge of the outside pressure was like an actual physical weight pressing inward against his skull. He fought against showing his feelings. The dial steadied at 3008, slowly climbed to 3004, stayed there. Bonnet whispered, "They're almost on top of her." A dial fluttered wildly, and they felt the whoomp of a detonation through the hull. Sparrow's glance darted to the static pressure gauge. It made a stately fluctuation through 3028, back to 3004. Garcia whispered, "I heard that the Barracuda took 3090 before she imploded."
"There's a bigger safety factor than that," said Bonnet.
Sparrow said, "May the Lord take their souls and grant them mercy, even as it may come to pass with us. God forgive us that we do this not in anger, but out of need." Garcia fingered the beads of his rosary through his shirt. A sudden thought passed through Sparrow's mind. He looked down at his first officer. "Les, what do you do when the heat is on?"
"Huh?"
Bonnet glanced up at him, back to the dials. "What do you think about?" Bonnet shrugged.
"I remind myself I've been married 4 times. 4 beautiful babes. What more could a man ask?"
"Every man to his own philosophy," said Sparrow. Ramsey entered the control room, took in the scene, whispered, "The silence woke me up. Are we hunting something?" "And vice versa," said Garcia. "Get in here and help me on the board." "You were not called to duty," said Sparrow. Ramsey hesitated. "Get in here with Les," said Sparrow. "I'll stand by with Joe." He backed away from the controls. Ramsey stepped into the vacated spot. Sparrow moved up to stand beside Garcia. Bonnet looked at Ramsey out of the corners of his eyes.
"I'll clue you in on something, Junior," he said. "This is too much like playing grab tail with a panther for me ever to become addicted to it."
Sparrow said, "We can't be traced from the track of our fish. They were on a curving course before they could have been detected."
"That second boy out there could have gotten a shockwave echo from the blast," said Bonnet. "He's just drifting now. He's already put out his anti-torp volley, and it should—"
3 shock waves washed over them in rapid succession. "That would be our fish being knocked out," said Sparrow. "Any breaking up noises from that EP?"
"Negative," said Bonnet.
"Then they have our position now from the echo," said Sparrow. "Send out a detection scrambler and get our anti-torp volley off." He slapped Garcia on the back, said, "Evasive action, force speed." Ramsey, standing beside Bonnet, hit a series of switches with the heel of his hand. A cloud of tiny torp-homing exploders swept out from the ram. Bonnet kicked the control, which sent out a dummy torpedo carrying signal equipment to scramble detection systems. "Why couldn't I have taken a nice safe job in a nitrox factory?" Garcia moaned.
"You guys who want to live forever make me sick," said Bonnet. "Here you are in a nice perambulating sewer pipe with
"Up!" barked Sparrow. "If we get into close quarters, I want a bigger pressure margin." Garcia complied. The deck slanted upward. Sorry about that. Garcia complied. The deck slanted upward. Ramsey said, "What makes you think—"
"We're coming out of that scrambler's field," said Bonnet.
"Fire another along our forward path," said Sparrow. Again he slapped Garcia's shoulder. Right rudder in drift. Garcia pulled the wheel right, straightened it, shut down the drive. Slowly the ram lost headway. Again the deck tilted to starboard. We've gotten sloppy on our trim, said Sparrow. Bonnet leaned toward Ramsey, whispered,
That guy's a genius. We coast along the edge of the first scrambler's field. The one we just sent out will leave a track for the other boys to follow, and they'll.
He broke off, staring at the detection system, eyes widening.
Skipper,
He husked, voice hanging on the edge of horror.
they're right on top of us. Force speed, going overhead now. Not more than 100 feet.
Sparrow shouldered Garcia aside, kicked the ram into force speed, swerved it into the wake of the other sub. To Bonnet he said, Keep us on their tail. Gently, friend. Gently. Garcia whispered, I heard of this happening once with old Plunger, but I never thought I'd see it myself. Ramsey said, They're blind spot. They can't hear us in the turbulence of their own wake. Bonnet's voice came calm and steady.
2 degrees port.
Sparrow swerved the ram to follow. Ramsey pointed to the oscilloscope. Bonnet followed the direction, said,
Skipper, off to starboard is a whole wolf pack. They're converging on that last scrambler we sent out.
Too close for comfort, said Sparrow. With one hand he eased down drive speed. With the other he punched the controls to arm a torpedo. Give me minimum range, he said. This has to be fast. As soon as the blast reaches us, fire scramblers to the 4 points of the compass. Bonnet acknowledged.
100 yards, he said. 125, 150, 170.
He glanced to the secondary scope.
Any second now, that pack will be getting 2 signals from us, and one of the signals won't fit IFF. 250, 275.
Sparrow fired the single torpedo, killed the drive, began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The concussion shook the ram. Bonnet fired the scramblers. Ramsey's ears were ringing. Sparrow kicked on drive to force speed, brought the ram about in a tight circle, coursing upward. With one hand he pushed Garcia into the control position, stepped back. They'll be expecting us to dive, he said. Blow the tanks. Garcia palmed the switches and the ram bounced to the lift. Sparrow said, Les, give me a 50-foot warning on the edge of the scrambler field.
Right, said Bonnet. We've a way to go yet.
Bonnet caught the puzzled look on Ramsey's face, said,
They taught you things in sub-school, but they never taught you this, did they?
Ramsey shook his head.
We're gonna float up, said Bonnet. We may be walking on the ceiling before we get there, but we're going to do it silently.
Sparrow looked to the static pressure gauge, 1,200 pounds, above the 3,000-foot level. He glanced inquiringly at Bonnet, who shook his head. The seconds ticked away. Bonnet said,
Now!
Garcia killed the drive. Sparrow wiped his face with his hands, looked startled when his hand came away bloody. Nosebleed, he said. Pressure change was too rapid. Haldane tablets, everyone. He fished a flat green pill from a pocket, popped it into his mouth. As always, his reaction was sudden nausea. He grimaced, held the pill down by willpower, shuddered. Ramsey choked on his pill, coughed, fought it down. Bonnet spat into his handkerchief, said,
Human beings weren't meant to take this kind of a beating.
He shook his head. The ram began to tip gently to the right. Sparrow looked at Ramsey, said, Johnny, go over to the left there. Ramsey complied, thinking,
What a way to get on a first-name basis. I'd sooner stay at Dryback.
As he passed Garcia, the engineering officer spoke the thought aloud.
Bet you wish you were still Junior Ramsey.
Ramsey smiled faintly. The deck's tipping slowed, but it did not stop. Sparrow nodded to Bonnet. Hand pump. Start shifting some water. Slow and easy. Bonnet stepped to the aft bulkhead, swung out a crank handle. Sparrow took over the searchboard position. Slowly, they steadied on an even keel, but now the nose began to sink. Then the deck began to slant slowly to the left. Sparrow glanced at Ramsey, nodded toward the aft bulkhead on his side. Take over the fore and aft stabilization. Easy does it. No noise. Ramsey moved to obey. He looked at the pressure gauge. 840 pounds. They were above the 2,000-foot level. We can maintain some sort of trim until we hit wave turbulence, said Sparrow. Then we may have to risk the drive. Gently, the ram drifted upward, tipping, canting. Ramsey found the rhythm of it. They couldn't hold her in exact trim, but they could rock her to a regular teeter-totter rhythm. He grinned across at Bonnet on lateral stabilization. The deck suddenly stopped a leftward countermotion and heeled far right, came back again, nose rising. Again she heeled to the right. A hissing sound resonated through the hull. The screen on the forward bulkhead, tuned to the conning TV eye, showed milky green. Sparrow stood at the controls, one hand on the rail. He stared upward at the screen. When's he going to give us headway? Ramsey wondered. This time the ram heaved far over to the left. For one frightening moment, Ramsey looked directly down into the pipe and conduit maze against the port pressure hull. We're going over, he thought. But the ram came back sluggishly, righting. The bulkhead screen broke free of foam, cleared to reveal fog and long, white-capped rollers. The ram pitched and bobbed in the seas.
I agree with you, Skipper, said Bonnet. One way of dying is as good as another. They'd have heard us sure.
Garcia worked his way along the handrail, fighting the uneasy motion of the deck.
If we could rig a sea anchor, he said.
We already have one, said Sparrow.
Garcia blushed. The tow. Thank you, Lord, for the lovely fog, said Bonnet.
The ram swung downwind from her tow in a wide, rolling arc, jerking against the lines like a wild horse at a snubbing post. More line on that tow, said Sparrow. He nodded to Garcia, who jumped to obey. The motion of the deck smoothed. Sparrow kept his gaze on the detection gear. What's our heading, Joe?
Near 58 degrees.
Wind's favorable, said Sparrow, and those boys down under haven't changed course.
They're still snooping after our last scrambler, said Garcia.
Time for you to go off watch, Joe, said Sparrow. I am relieving you.
Want me to bring up some sandwiches before I sack down? Asked Garcia. Ham and cheese, said Bonnet.
No thanks, said Sparrow. He studied the sonoscope on the searchboard. We'll drift with the wind until we no longer get signals from that pack. Ramsey yawned. Sparrow hooked a thumb toward the aft door. You too. That was a good job, Johnny. Ramsey said, Aye. He followed Garcia down the companionway, muscles aching from the unaccustomed exercise at the ballast pumps. Garcia turned at the wardroom door, looked at Ramsey. Chow? Ramsey steadied himself with one hand against the bulkhead. Beneath him, the deck rolled and dipped. These tubs weren't designed for the surface, said Garcia. What breed of sandwich? The thought of food suddenly made Ramsey's stomach heave.
The long companionway appeared to gyrate in front of him, rolling counter to the motion of the deck. He capped his mouth with a hand, raced for his quarters. He reached the wash basin just in time, stood over it, retching. Garcia followed him, pressed a blue pill into his hand, made him swallow it. Presently, the surging of Ramsey's stomach eased. "Thanks," he said. "In the sack, Junior." Garcia helped him grope his way into his bunk, pulled a blanket over him. Seasick. I'll never live it down, thought Ramsey. He heard Garcia leave. Presently he remembered the telemeter, but he was too weak, too drowsy. He drifted off to sleep. The motion of the ram became a soothing thing. Rockabye, rockabye. He could almost hear a voice, far away, down a tunnel, in an echo chamber. The boat is my mother. I shall not want. When he awakened, it was to call to watch, and he had a scant moment in which to glance at the telemeter tapes. Sparrow had returned to the pattern of rigid control. It was as though Ramsey's subconscious had been working on a problem, chewing it, and these were the final data. The answers came spewing up to his conscious level. He knew what he had to do. Part 2. A Time of Testing. Chapter 8. 23 hours the ram drifted downwind, angling away from Iceland to the northeast. A gray speck on gray and foam. And behind her, barely submerged, the green surge of their tow, a sea monster escaped from the deep. In Ramsey's second watch, they passed within 2 miles of a radioactive iceberg, probably broken from the skerries of the northeast Greenland coast. Ramsey kept radiation snoopers tuned to the limit until they were out of range. The berg, its random contours catching the wind like a sail, was almost quartering the gale. It pulled away from the ram like a majestic ship. Ramsey noted in the log. Current setting easterly away from our course. We did not cross the berg's path. Outside radiation, 1800 millar. Garcia came across the control room. Safe yet? Clear, said Ramsey. Garcia looked to the screen on the control bulkhead, the view of gray rollers. Moderating. If the fog will just hold, said Ramsey. Sparrow came through the aft door, his lank form seemingly more loose-jointed than usual. He's relaxed, thought Ramsey. That fits. What EP commander would dream of looking for us up here? We're too low in the water to show on a shore screen. All quiet, Skipper, he said. Very good, said Sparrow. He looked to the time log. 9 days, 3 hours, and 47 minutes. Joe, how long since you've had a signal from our friends? Not a sign of them for almost 10 hours. Sparrow glanced at the sonoran chart. The red dot stood at 66 degrees, 9 minutes, 20 seconds north latitude, 2 degrees, 11 minutes west longitude. He nodded to Ramsey. Get us underway, if you please. Surface speed. Quarter throttle. Keep us under 8 knots. Ramsey moved to obey. The ram shuddered to a wave impact, fought up the slope of a sea. They gathered headway, sluggishly. She answers the helm, sir, said Ramsey. Sparrow nodded. Course 13 degrees. We've drifted a bit too close to the Norwegian coastline. The EPs have shore-based listening posts there. Ramsey brought the sub-tug around on her new heading. We'll stay on the surface as long as we have fog, said Sparrow.
Our guardian angels are working overtime, said Garcia. I wonder if they have a union, asked Ramsey.
Sparrow looked to the time log. 9 days, 4 hours, even. He caught Garcia's attention, nodded toward the time log and then the helm. Take over, if you please, Joe. Garcia took the helm from Ramsey. You are relieved, said Sparrow. Ramsey felt a wave of fatigue sweep through him. He remembered what he had to do, fought down the tiredness.
We'll be there soon, he said.
Sparrow frowned.
None too soon for me, said Ramsey. I feel like we're living on borrowed time. I want our payment in the bank, a whole load of that sweet oil.
That will be enough, said Sparrow.
You afraid I'm going to give away a nasty old security secret? Asked Ramsey.
Garcia darted a puzzled glance at him. Go to your quarters, said Sparrow.
Right-o, said Ramsey, copying Garcia's accent.
He made his tone as insolent as possible, without coming to actual insubordination, turned toward the aft door. I'll wish to speak with you before your next watch, said Sparrow. We're long overdue for an understa— He broke off as a red warning light flashed on the reactor's system scram board. The light winked green, then red, then green. Garcia saw it too. Ramsey turned back to the control bulkhead, caught the last flash from red to green. Something's loose in the pile room, said Sparrow.
That torpedo shock we took, said Ramsey. More likely the pounding we've had from these seas, said Garcia.
That's circuit T of the secondary damper controls, said Sparrow. Right side forward. Get less up here on the double. Garcia pushed the alarm buzzer. Try the screens, said Sparrow. Ramsey moved back to the helm, took it. Garcia glanced at him, moved to the screen controls, began hitting switches.
Bonnet entered. What's up?
Something loose in the pile room, said Sparrow. It's T circuit.
Right side forward, said Bonnet.
He moved to get a better view of the screens, caught the handrail to steady himself against the rolling of the deck. Sparrow said, I'm going forward. He looked at the scram board. The light winked at him. Red, green, red, green, red, green. Les, come forward with me and help me into a suit. I'll have to crawl the right side tunnel. Use the manuals and mirrors.
Just a minute, Skipper, said Garcia. Look at that. He pointed at a screen. Sparrow stepped to his side. Central damper controls, said Garcia. See? When we pitch into the trough of a wave, it seems to— There! They all saw it. The long hanging arm of the manual damper control swung free like the multi-jointed leg of an insect. It exposed a break at the top elbow hinge. The upper bracing flapped outward to the sway of the boat. It was wedged against the hinge, said Garcia. Now it's broken free again. He looked at the scram board. Red, green, red, green, red. Each time the light flashed red, the swinging arm touched a control circuit cable. A blue arc of electricity splashed upward. Garcia pointed to the lower half of the screen which showed the base of the control system. There's the real trouble. The whole control base is twisted. See those sheared bolts? Sparrow whirled to the forward hatch, undogged it.
Les, I've changed my mind. Stay here with Johnny on the main board. Joe? Come with me. He stared at Ramsey, hesitated, then said, Take us down below wave turbulence. Ramsey's hands went to the controls. Diving planes 2 degrees, compensating system open. Hull pressure holding. He found that it was better to let his body react, to accept the results of his training, secure in the knowledge that this way he would be right. Sparrow went through the door, out onto the engine room catwalk. Garcia followed. Ramsey activated the engine room scanners to follow their movements. What a time I picked to go into my act, he thought. He gave a mental shrug. But one time's as good as another.
We're gonna make it, said Bonnet. Nothing can stop us.
Startled, Ramsay darted a glance at the first officer. Bonnet was staring at the screen. Ramsay followed the direction of his gaze. Sparrow and Garcia were scrambling down the ladder to the right side tunnel. Sparrow jerked open the door to the bulkhead locker, swung out an ABG suit on its traveler rack.
The EPs are crazy to think they can beat him, said Bonnet. He's like a god.
Something in Bonnet's voice. Ramsay fought down a shudder. The screen showed Garcia helping Sparrow into the bulky suit. Ramsay turned back to his controls as the sub-tug steadied. He found the need to say something. Said, "We're out of wave turbulence." Bonnet looked at him.
Do tell.
He turned his attention back to the screen. Ramsay adjusted the controls, brought the deck to level. Now Sparrow was completely sealed into his suit. He turned clumsily, helped Garcia. What does the telemeter show? Ramsay wondered. Is Sparrow under control, or is the wild feedback starting? In the heavy suit, Sparrow felt the perspiration begin to roll off him. His fingers seemed unwilling to obey him as he assisted Garcia. Damned sweatsuits. There. The final seal went into place. Sparrow took a deep breath, spoke into his suit mic.
Testing, testing. Do you read me, Les?
The captain's voice boomed out of the speaker on the control desk. Ramsay turned down the volume. Bonnet spoke into his chest mic.
Loud and clear.
Joe,
Said Sparrow.
are you receiving me?
Righto, Skipper.
Now get this, Les,
Said Sparrow.
if that damper arm swings out too far, it'll begin clubbing the side of the pile. Monitor me on your screen. I might not be able to see a position change soon enough.
Bonnet looked to the screen showing the reactor room.
It's quiet now, Skipper. Resting against the first stage clamps.
Those bolts are sheared off, though,
Said Sparrow.
the whole unit could fall over onto the pile.
Bonnet studied the screen.
Skipper, there's a chance you could catch the main drive bar with the grapple of the forward manuals.
He bent closer to the screen.
It'll be a near thing. You'll have to snake past that broken hinge.
How much clearance?
Maybe 6 inches, no more. The mirror's at a bad angle.
Take me in.
Said Sparrow.
We can do it.
He turned, undogged the tunnel hatch, and snapped on his helmet light.
Joe, stay here unless I call you.
He reached a hand into the tunnel, found the filter system switch, started it. He plugged his suit hose into the traveler, tested the air. Garcia said, "I'll time you. Have Les monitor the tunnel radiation." Bonnet, listening to the conversation over the intercom, said,
I'll give you the time over radiation from here.
He twisted a dial, plugged in a jack, tested the circuit.
I'm going in,
Said Sparrow. He bent, slid into the tunnel.
I'll give you a running commentary when I reach the manuals, Les. Get everything on tape. Base will want a complete record of this.
Take it slow and easy, Skipper,
said Bonnet. Sparrow said,
Joe, dog that tunnel door behind me. If that base falls to the right, it'll smash the end plug. There'd be hot stuff all over the place.
Righto. A faint thump behind Sparrow and a feeling of pressure change told him when Garcia had complied. Sparrow felt the isolation like a physical band tightening on his forehead. Perspiration rolled down his cheeks, down his nose. His clothes were damp with it, clinging to him. Garcia's voice came over the phones like a sound from another world.
What do you see, Skipper?
Tunnel's clear. Nothing hot yet.
His helmet light cut a bright path through the metallic darkness. It's another birth canal, he thought, and he remembered all the times he had crawled the mock-up tunnel at training school without ever encountering that thought. There's a first time for everything, a first time to be born, a first time to die. He longed to wipe the perspiration from his forehead. Lest ye be born again, ye shall not enter. The light picked up the safety door near the end of the tunnel. This was the limit of the bulkhead. Beyond that was the lead soda straw jutting into the pile room. At the end, the manuals. He undogged the door, swung it back into its recess. Pile room floodlights cast their blue glare onto the tunnel floor ahead of him, reflected through the mirror system in a weird splotching of brilliance and shadows. Sparrow inched his way into the glare.
I'm at the manuals,
He said. He turned onto his back, fighting against the terror that threatened to overwhelm him. Out there in the blue glare of the pile room was... what? The world and all its threats. Garcia's voice came over the intercom.
Are you okay, Skipper?
Sparrow took a deep breath.
Yes.
I'll pretend I'm still in school, he thought. This is a test. I have to pass or take a black mark. They've yanked the control units free of their base, and I have to make repairs under simulated action conditions. Old Lieutenant Maury is back at the tunnel mouth hoping I'll fail. That's not really a reactor out there, it's just a mock-up. They wouldn't risk an unimportant student with the real thing. They have to wait until you've had all that expensive training and it costs something to lose you. Then...
Skipper,
Les's voice, metallic in the phones.
Yes?
are you ready?
Just a moment, Les.
Right.
Sparrow slipped his hands into the fitted grips of the manual controls, pulled the stud which hooked him into the grapple. He pulled back with his right hand, watched in the mirror as the grapple came into lift position.
Les?
I see it, Skipper. Bring it up about 3 feet. Line it up with the spring bar, but keep it back away from the broken hinge.
Sparrow pulled down on the right grip, turned it slightly to bring the hydraulic booster into play. The grapple darted upward. Too fast! Sweat popped out on his forehead.
A little slower,
Said Bonnet. Sparrow whispered.
Lord, I am like David. I am in a great strait. Let us fall now into the land of the Lord, for his mercies are great, and let me not fall into the hand of man. Stay now thine hand. I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Put thine hand over mine, Lord. Guide me.
Steadiness came to him.
Did you say something, Skipper?
Asked Bonnet.
I'm all set, Les. Guide me in.
Okay, you have to come up about 6 inches and to the left about an inch. Take it slow.
Sparrow lowered the thrust of the hydraulic booster, put his muscle into the grip. The manual arm went up slowly, paused, shifted to the left.
Right on, Skipper. Bring it forward 3 feet and lock it while you lift the rear hinge section into place.
The grapple moved as though it were a part of his body. He twisted his left grip to lock the end section, eased the next element of the grapple arm into alignment.
How's that?
Perfect. Now you can lift your whole arm about an inch. Now, can you lift the whole arm about an inch? You're a little close to that broken hinge.
I can't see the end of the grapple and the next element at the same time, Les. I'd better watch the element.
Okay. Fine it down and bring the grapple end up a quarter of an inch at a time.
Sparrow grunted as he made the first lift.
That was a half inch, Skipper. One more exactly like it.
Again, Sparrow grunted as he moved the grip.
A hair over, Skipper, but you still have clearance.
Do you want me to fine it down?
Nah, let it stand there. Now bring the grapple end past the hinge. One straight push about 3 feet.
Sparrow twisted his head to get a view of the grapple in the mirrors. It looked as though it would smash directly into the broken hinge. Poor angle of view, he thought. How'd a piece of bad planning like that get by? He lifted his right hand grip. The grapple surged forward. Stopped.
Hold it right there a second, Skipper.
Sparrow heard mumbling over the phones. Bonnet's voice returned.
You'll have to get 3 elements of the grapple arm past that break before you can drop the tip. Better align the next element.
Sparrow brought up the next hinged section, straightened it.
How's the alignment?
Right on. Bring it forward.
He complied, his hands moving the controls with increased sureness. The next element came up, was aligned, sent forward.
Another foot forward, Skipper.
He moved the grapple arm.
Now comes the ticklish part. Drop the end at number 3 joint. Take it down slowly and stop when I tell you.
Sparrow bent the end elements downward. He thought it was almost as though he could feel the moving part as he could feel his own arm. He sensed the position and stopped it while Bonnet was forming the order on his lips. The grapple end was out of sight below the control base. It would take 4 adjustments of the mirrors to bring it back into view.
You're about 10 inches above the main drive bar. To reach it, you'll have to angle down with that section spanning the broken hinge.
I don't,
I don't dare jar that hinge,
said Sparrow.
There's a lot of leverage that far up. I could break it right off.
I've used calipers on the screen,
said Bonnet.
You'll have about an inch to spare.
Sparrow felt the fatigue in his wrists and forearms, whispered,
Just a little longer, Lord. We're making it.
You ready?
asked Bonnet.
Yes. Talk me down.
Okay, take the tip towards you about 4 inches.
Sparrow moved the grapple.
Now down 6 inches.
Sparrow eased the tip downward. He felt the sureness of his control. Said,
How is the lateral alignment?
Half an inch to the right.
He shifted the descent angle, continued down with the tip.
How's the upper clearance?
You still have 2 inches.
He felt the grapple jaws touch the drive bar, lowered them onto it, gripped the bar.
Skipper, you couldn't have done that better if you'd had your own hand out there.
Sparrow locked the grapple into position, brought up secondary grapples to brace it. He slid backward down the tunnel until he could reach the manual controls at number 2 position, reached up with a short grapple and clamped it onto the broken unit. The control shivered.
Lordy,
said Bonnet.
It would have gone right over without the bracing on that drive bar.
Sparrow swung an extension torch into place above the broken hinge, locked it into position, lifted the broken end until the sheared sections touched. He started the torch.
Fuse it solid at the hinge. Only thing I can do now.
Wait a minute. That's Sparrow. Fuse it solid at the hinge. Only thing I can do now. There's enough play in the other elements to almost compensate for the lost mobility. We'll be able to cover more than 80% of this pile face. The manuals will cover the rest.
What are you going to do, Skipper?
What about the base?
I'm gonna knock the sheared bolts right on through into the catch basin.
He lowered the torch, playing its flame onto the sheared hinge. At the molten moment, he cut the torch, crushed the broken elements together. The repair formed a wedge-shaped cup. He sprayed the inside with brazing flux, brought up the brazing rod, and filled the cup.
That looks like it'll hold,
said Bonnet.
I've been examining the base. It doesn't appear to be warped, but it's out of alignment. You'll need a spreader jack at the aft end.
Right. What's the inclination?
About 1 degree. They put the replacement bolts along the inside face first. They'll hold it while you drop the drive bar.
I have a better idea,
said Sparrow.
Watch closely and tell me if anything starts to go wrong.
What are you going to do?
Drop the bolts into place along the inner face, then throw a little torque into the drive bar. The thrust against the grapple will push the base back into position.
That's risky.
No worse than thrusting a jack against the base of the pile to horse that thing into position. This way, we don't touch the pile.
Sparrow continued to speak as he worked.
Rule 1 of pile room repair should be, don't touch the reactor unless you absolutely have to.
You have 9 minutes, Skipper, said Bonnet. You should be on your way out in 5 minutes.
That's another reason for doing it my way,
said Sparrow.
Couldn't Joe finish it?
Only if he has to. Best not to have two of us on the cooling off list.
He touched the drive bar switch. The control base rocked against its grapple braces. Metal protested. Two of the bolts dropped into position. Sparrow slipped nuts onto them, drove them tight with a motor wrench. Again he rocked the base with the drive bar. The remaining bolts slipped home. Sparrow's fingers flew over the manual controls as he completed the job. He disengaged the grapples, swung the repair control arm out of the way, clamped it.
2 minutes, Skipper. On your way, right now.
Sparrow released the last temporary brace, dropped it, slid backward down the tunnel, closed and dogged the door at the bulkhead limit. His helmet light was a pale flame after the blue glare of the tunnel end. He crawled backward, heard Garcia undog the door behind him, felt the other man's suited hands on his legs helping him the last few feet. Bonnet's voice came over the phones.
You went about a minute over. Get down to the sick bay and take your shots.
Sparrow grinned. It was good for Les to give orders, eased his tensions.
On the double, Skipper, said Bonnet. Every second's delay means that much more time cooling off for you.
Whew! Intense like a circus. I swear, every chapter, every crisis, I'm like sweating because I'm just right there. Admittedly, I've never worked in a submarine, so I have no idea how accurate this is. But I can feel like I have. Chapter 9. Sparrow fought down a feeling of irritation. Under Rule 90, Bonnet was technically in command when his superior officer had taken an overdose of radiation. But 1 minute! Garcia ran a snooper over him, working silently, gesturing for Sparrow to turn. The engineering officer straightened, racked the snooper.
Into that decon chamber?
He unhooked Sparrow's hose from the tunnel system, closed the door, and dogged it. Sparrow climbed into the decontamination chamber, felt the surge of foaming detergent around him.
Joe, what's the delay?
Bonnet again.
He's in decon now, Les. 30 seconds more.
Cut it short, Joe. Ramsey is on his way down with the needles to give him his shots there. It'll save a couple of minutes.
Ramsey came out on the catwalk above them, carrying a radiation first aid kit under his arm. He dropped down to their level, helped Garcia break the seal on his suit. Sparrow came out of the chamber without his suit, frowned at the kit in Ramsey's hand. "Bend over, Skipper," said Ramsey. Sparrow obeyed, dropped his trousers, winced at the needle. "Just don't enjoy yourself, Johnny," he said. Ramsey extracted the needle, wiped the bare skin with disinfectant. "That does it, and I hope you never have to do the same for me." The lifting of tension about Sparrow was an almost physical thing. Ramsey replaced the hypodermic in the kit, sealed it. "Let's go," said Sparrow. Garcia hung his ABG suit in its locker, followed them up the ladder. Ramsey thought, "What's on the telemeter? Lord, I thought he'd never come out of that tunnel." They stepped out onto the center catwalk, headed for the control room. Abruptly, the giant motors around them fell silent. Sparrow broke into a run, ducked through into the control room. Ramsey sprinted after him, went through the door on Sparrow's heels. Bonnet stood at the search board, one hand on the drive controls. His eyes were on the oscilloscope of the limit sonofinder. He spoke without turning.
Signal at extreme range. We've lost it.
By now they must have a rough idea of our course, said Sparrow. They're quartering the area. What's the depth?
We're over the subarctic shallows, said Bonnet. Bottom's about 350 fathoms.
Too shallow for us to lie doggo, said Sparrow. They would range too close for.
There it is again,
said Bonnet. He nodded toward the scope, adjusted two flanking dials.
Northeast. Packed by the noise. Damn, lost them again. That's probably a school of fish between us.
Head for the Norway Basin, said Sparrow. We need deep water. He glanced at the Sonoran chart. Course 9 degrees. Bonnet engaged the drive, swung the helm to the left until they were on the new course. Sparrow stepped to his nav plot board, bent over it, figuring. Presently he straightened. Estimating time of arrival 2 hours and 6 minutes. He turned. Johnny, stay with the search here. We've the range on them, but not so much that we can afford to get careless. Ramsey moved to the search board. Garcia stepped through the door from the engine room.
The real danger is an EP that lies doggo until we're in range, he said.
It's a big ocean, said Sparrow.
And a small world, said Garcia.
Sparrow looked at the radiation kit which Ramsey had placed on one of the control board stools. He glanced at his wristwatch. Does someone have a timer set for my next shots?
I have, said Ramsey.
Get what rest you can, Skipper, said Bonnet. I'll have a look at you as soon as we find a sitting spot.
I can do it, said Garcia.
Bonnet nodded.
Okay.
Timer's in the kit, said Ramsey.
Garcia picked up the sealed box, gestured for Sparrow to precede him aft. They're worried about me, thought Sparrow, but 1 minute over isn't that important. Ramsey noted the proprietary attitude of Garcia and Bonnet toward Sparrow, realized abruptly that he shared it.
He's our skipper, he thought.
Sparrow and Garcia went aft. The ram crept onward.
It's a little deeper, said Ramsey. We're over the hump.
Sill depth across here runs 400 to 600 fathoms, said Bonnet. When we reach 600, we'll be close to the basin slope.
It's 450 now.
A bad stretch, said Bonnet. You'd expect the EPs to be ranging this area in net formations.
Garcia slipped into the control room.
Les.
How is he?
Are you sure it was just 1 minute over?
Certainly I'm sure. What's wrong?
Very low white count. Looks closer to half an hour over. It looks closer to half an hour over.
Any burns?
No indications yet. It could be that he didn't recover well from handling that security lieutenant, said Ramsey. That's what I was thinking, said Garcia. I'll give him a sedative and a booster shot of desulf and decarb.
Good.
Bonnet turned to Garcia.
Stick by him until I call you.
Right-o. Garcia ducked back through the door. Bonnet's in command, thought Ramsey. We never thought of that. Can he adjust to the job? And then another thought. Good Lord, what if he's the sleeper? He studied the first officer covertly out of the corners of his eyes. The ram sped onward. Depth 350. Depth 550 fathoms, said Ramsey. Bonnet shifted the ram's diving planes, took them down to 500 fathoms in a low glide. He brought the deck level when the pressure gauge read 1,300 pounds to the square inch. 20 minutes, said Ramsey.
Give or take a few, said Bonnet. What's wrong with Joe? Why doesn't he let us know how the skipper is?
You didn't tell him to, said Ramsey.
Yeah, but...
There's most likely nothing to report. It's too soon.
Get him on the intercom.
Ramsey shrugged, thumbed the switch on his chest mic.
Joe?
Here?
How's the skipper?
Still sleeping. I'd give a pretty to know what the overdose actually was.
Did you check his dosimeter?
Right after he got out of the tunnel. Slight overage, just as Les said. You know, I'm no medical chap, but I'd bloody well swear that he'd gotten contaminated atmos.
How?
I don't know, really. I saw him check suit pressure before going in. It was still holding when he came out. I'm certain there were no leaks.
Did you snoop the tunnel filter system?
That's what I'm worried about, Johnny. I naturally assumed.
Bonnet interrupted, speaking into his own microphone. Can you leave the skipper?
Yes, he's resting quietly.
Get forward and snoop that filter.
I'm on my way.
Bonnet turned to Ramsey. There's a lesson for you, and I'm ashamed to say it of Joe. Never assume anything. You have to know. Couldn't he assume that the tunnel's filter system was okay? Well, we assume a lot of things about our little world. The perfect ecology, muttered Bonnet. Self-sustaining. Garcia slipped into the control room, went out the forward door without speaking. If that filter system is leaking, said Bonnet, I'll... Signal! Ramsey slapped the cutoff switch, silencing the drive. The ram drifted. Quartering to the east. He narrowed down the tuning band. Pack. There's more behind us. He rotated the finder band. More at 350. 340. Boxed, said Bonnet. Have they spotted us? Can't be certain. No collision courses. What's the depth? Reading now, 680 fathoms. We're on the edge of the basin. Bonnet engaged the drive, eased them forward at minimum speed. Tell me the instant you detect a change of course from one of those signals. Aye. Garcia's voice came over the intercom.
Les?
What is it?
Filter's cool, but the inner hose line shows a slight leakage.
How much?
60 MR. I make it a 38-minute overdose.
Where's the leak?
Inside somewhere. Maybe that broken control arm slapped something. I can't tell from here.
Dog the hatch and come up here. We're ranging an EP signal.
Righto. I heard you slip the drive.
Bonnet turned to Ramsey. Depth? Something over 7,200 feet. Shelving off rapidly. Less! That pack behind us has changed course. Ramsey worked over his dials. They've closed the angle, but they're not headed for us. It could be a trick. We can't chance it. He fed more power to the drive. The ram picked up speed. They're on us. They've altered course, increased speed. Bonnet pushed the drive control to its limit. They felt the straining of the giant engines. Garcia stepped into the control room, wiped a spot of grease from his hand, looked at the search scope. Have we had it, chaps? Bonnet ignored him. Depth? A little over 1,500 fathoms. I'd make it about 9,100 feet. Ramsey reset a dial behind the search scope. The pack to our east has changed course. They are now on collision heading. It was nice knowing you, gentlemen, said Garcia. We can't turn east or south, said Bonnet. Bottom is 2,000 feet below our limit. I'm getting an interference reading at 8,400 feet, said Ramsey. Seamount, heading 215 degrees. It might just as well be 84,000 feet, said Garcia. That'd be something like 3,600 pounds to the square inch, almost 600 over our limit. They'll be in firing range within a half hour, said Ramsey. He glanced at Bonnet. What happens to the pressure hull coefficient if we boost internal pressure beyond 10 atmos? We wouldn't be alive to enjoy it, said Garcia. Maybe, said Ramsey. He slipped his vampire gauge from its belt case, locked it onto his wrist, shot the needle into his vein. How long would it take to draw everything but the oxy out of our atmos? Pure oxy? Garcia appeared startled. What's on your mind? asked Bonnet. Ramsey said, Put the anhydrase generation on manual and balance it by sight. He nodded toward the gauge on his wrist. What do the medics say about that? Asked Garcia. Nothing certain, said Ramsey. I've heard it argued both ways. He glanced at the scope in front of him. I think it may be our only chance.
Joe, take over here, said Bonnet.
He stepped away from the controls as Garcia took hold of the helm. What are you going to do, Les?
Unhook the governor from the anhydrase generator system.
Garcia's head jerked around. You're not paying serious attention to this punk's suggestion. Bonnet already was removing the cover plate from the atmosphere controls.
I am.
That's suicide. Bonnet looked to the scope in front of Ramsey.
We're already dead. What do we have to lose?
He put the cover plate carefully on the deck, returned to the maze of wiring which had been revealed. It's those red primaries at the top, said Garcia.
I know,
said Bonnet. He reached in with cutter pliers, snipped the wires.
Do you think the skipper's all right?
This is no time to worry about that. Bonnet nodded, adjusted a pump control.
Johnny, what's the helium reading?
.4. Bonnet took out his own vampire gauge, adjusted it on his wrist.
Joe, take us down, heading 215 degrees. Johnny, how far to that seamount?
6 minutes. Bonnet's head snapped up.
You been working time over distance in your head?
Ramsey busied himself with the search controls as the ram's deck slanted downward. Yes.
We'll make a submariner.
We'll make a submariner out of him yet, said Garcia. He looked at Bonnet. Are you sure it wouldn't be better to try floating up again?
They're too close, said Bonnet. Besides, I'm afraid to take another chance on rolling. We sheared off the damper control base in there.
He nodded toward the bow.
No telling what we did to the pile base.
Garcia wet his lips with his tongue. Won't they hear us go down? Asked Ramsey.
They know our depth limit, said Bonnet.
This was your idea, said Garcia. Are you getting cold feet? Ramsey swallowed.
Their metal detection is poor, said Bonnet. I'm counting on their thinking we've taken the deep 6 rather than risk their fish.
They won't hear any breaking up noises, said Garcia. We hope, said Ramsey. Garcia paled. Ramsey looked to the big static pressure gauge. Outside pressure 2,900 pounds. He glanced at Bonnet. Skipper.
We have only one skipper, said Bonnet. He's aft in sick bay.
No, I'm not. They whirled. Sparrow stood in the aft doorway, hand on the metal rim, face pale and beaded with perspiration. What is the situation, Les? Bonnet told him. Sparrow turned a searching look on Ramsey. This was your idea? Ramsey nodded. How long was he standing there? He wondered.
What are your orders?
Asked Bonnet. Carry on, said Sparrow. You are in command. Bonnet turned back to the pressure controls.
Helium below detection range, he said. Shall we go sit in the mud, Joe?
The medics say it's theoretically possible for the human body to take 400 pounds under pure oxy and carbonic anhydrase conditions, said Ramsey.
Do all of them say that?
Asked Bonnet. No, only some of them. I can see it now, said Garcia. An account of the reactions of 4 human bodies to 400 pounds atmospheric pressure in a Helldiver-class submarine, with technical commentary on the autopsies. Ramsey shivered, looked at the red center dial on the static pressure gauge showing the ram's internal pressure, 297 pounds to the square inch. He glanced at the vampire gauge on his wrist, said, CO2 diffusion is now 0.266. We have 0.054 to go under present conditions. Bonnet said,
I'll give us 350 pounds internal as a starter.
He opened a valve, increased the anhydrase pump setting. 2 minutes to bottom, said Ramsey. It's a long, thin seamount, ridge running parallel with our course, about 10 miles.
Pressure is holding, said Bonnet. How long until that pack ranges us?
15 minutes. Behind them, Sparrow said, Now we're going to find out how well these Helldivers are built. I'm more interested in how well I'm built, said Garcia. I'd say the good Lord did an excellent job, all things considered, said Bonnet. Ramsay thought, now that was a strange remark from him. More what I'd have expected from Sparrow.
Lord, we beg your indulgence upon us, said Sparrow, we who have no right to ask it. Amen.
Flatten the glide angle, said Bonnet. Garcia brought up the nose. Give us the nose eyes and 2 searchlights.
The main screen above them came alive, showing a path of light through green water. Pale phosphorescent shapes ranged beyond the limits of the light. Ramsay looked at the internal pressure reading, 400 pounds even.
Ease her down, said Bonnet.
The deck tipped. Outside pressure passed through 3,400 pounds, 3,420, 3,440. Ramsay found himself unable to tear his gaze away from the dial. 3,500, 3,520, 3,540.
Diffusion is normal, said Bonnet. Is anyone feeling ill effects?
I feel silly, said Garcia.
Steady, said Bonnet.
Be alert for oxygen intoxication, said Sparrow.
The pressure dial passed 3,600 pounds, 3,620.
Flatten the glide, said Bonnet.
Garcia complied.
How far to the bottom?
Ramsay forced himself to look at his instruments. 50 feet.
Down,
said Bonnet. Again the deck tipped. Now they watched the big screen below the pressure gauge. There! It seemed to come at them out of a green fog, a long pie cut of red ooze slashed from the darkness by the searchlights. A uniform ripple pattern stretched diagonally across the ooze. It showed not a sign of sea life. Garcia eased up the bow planes and the ram grounded gently, stirring up a fog of the red ooze which clouded the screen.
Kill the drive, said Bonnet.
Garcia's hand already was on the switch. The motors fell silent. Ramsay whispered, It's 8,460 feet. A new world's record, said Garcia. Sparrow stepped forward onto the control deck. Thank you, Lord, he said. I've come to a decision, said Ramsay. I'm just a natural-born coward. Nothing ever came so easy to me in all my life.
Is anybody feeling ill effects from the pressure? Asked Sparrow.
I'm still feeling silly, said Garcia.
Anybody else?
Ramsay shook his head, studied the search instruments in front of him.
Diffusion is .214, said Bonnet. We're still rid of it faster than we take it in.
Ramsay said, Great God in heaven! Where else would you expect him to be? Asked Garcia. There's a cold current moving in, said Ramsay, right over us.
God spreads his cloak upon us, said Sparrow.
Pack ranging over us to the south, said Ramsay, 8,000 yards. Bonnet said,
Any indications that they smell us?
No. They won't look where they don't believe we can be, said Garcia. He grinned. And that's not strange. I don't believe I'm here either. I'm losing 'em through that cold layer, said Ramsay. Skipper and God are buddies, said Garcia. Good, close buddies. Do favors for each other all the time. He staggered slightly. Ramsay grabbed Garcia's wrist, looked at his vampire gauge. Diffusion normal. What's...
Oxygen reactions vary, said Bonnet.
What's wrong with you chaps? Garcia's head wobbled. He peered at them owlishly.
Take it easy, Joe, said Sparrow.
Easy? He squinted up at Sparrow. I know you, Skipper. You're King David all over again. I've heard you. He shook his head loosely, lifted his right hand. In my distress I called upon the Lord, and cried to my God, and he did hear my voice out of his temple, and my cry did enter into his ears.
All right, Joe, let's go back and hit the sack.
Sparrow took Garcia's elbow, urged him toward the aft door. Help me, said Garcia. He shook off Sparrow's hand, staggered, caught his balance, turned, and stared deliberately at Ramsey. I know all about you, Mr. Long John Ramsey. You look down your long nose at me. Think you know something about me. You don't know nothing. Nothing. That will be quite enough, Mr. Garcia. Sparrow's voice had iron in it, a harsh note of command. Sorry, Skipper. He turned toward the door. Let's go. I'm tired. Sparrow stared at Ramsey, then turned, urged Garcia out the door. In the control room there was silence for a moment, broken only by the faintest murmuring of standby machinery. Then Bonnet said,
Long John, how'd you get a nickname like that?
Ramsey studied his instrument before turning toward Bonnet. That damned nickname. It could only mean that Garcia knew about his past, his real past. Bonnet said,
I asked.
Yes, I heard you. A supply officer christened me. Said I was a worse pirate than the original Long John Silver. That's all.
Pirate? Why?
For scrounging extra equipment. Moonlight requisition. Bonnet smiled.
I don't see why that'd put Joe on his ear, unless he's jealous of someone better at it than he is.
And Ramsey was thinking, Garcia will tell the skipper. Sure as hell he will. Is it extra hot in here? He asked Bonnet. Ramsey looked at the beads of perspiration on Bonnet's face, glanced at his vampire gauge. Blood temperature normal. He looked at the dial of the thermosystem monitor on his board, said,
71 degrees.
71 degrees.
My skin feels itchy.
Oh, it was...
Is it extra hot in here?
asked Bonnet.
My skin feels itchy,
said Bonnet. Ramsey resisted the impulse to scratch at his own forearm, said, I've been noticing the same thing. Bonnet glanced at the exposed wiring of the atmosphere controls, checked a dial setting.
Anhydrase generation is double the normal. Gas volume 20 cc's per cubic meter.
We're off in a wild unknown, said Ramsey.
We shouldn't be, said Ramsey. We've had carbonic anhydrase for 40 years.
Ramsey reset a kickout meter on his sono board, looked up at the primary oscilloscope. Hear anything?
Hear anything?
Ramsey shook his head. This CA is funny stuff, Les. We've pushed chimpanzees to 400 pounds with it for extended periods. Some lived, some didn't. A few of the bright boys think they know why.
Why?
Well, the theory is that CA acts on a rather nebulous central nervous system thing called the metabolic governor in such a way as to keep us from burning up when available oxygen is increased. They think sometimes the governor gets a little bit off, out of timing kind of, and the organism gets caught in a feedback situation, oscillates to death.
Why?
That they don't know. Maybe the metabolic governor gets tired.
What are the chances one of us will get caught that way?
Ramsey shot a sharp glance at him, looked at the search board. That's a stupid question, Les. Bonnet colored. His jaws set. If you're trying to get me to reassure you, no dice, said Ramsey. All I know is we're still alive, even if we are a bit Signal! He slapped the switch on the ranging computer, read the dial. 500 yards. They're quartering southwest.
Do we still have God's cold cloak over us?
Ramsey caught a jibing cynicism in Bonnet's voice he had never noted before. He glanced at the thermocouple dial. It's been over us periodically. Gone now. I think this seamount acts like a barrier to the Arctic current. Probably sets up complex whirl patterns. He looked back to the ranging dials. The EPs are holding course. They're drawing away now.
Was there any doubt that they would?
Asked Bonnet. What do you mean?
You've got some things to learn yet about our skipper,
said Bonnet.
Joe wasn't joking. There's an uncanny...
The ram gave an abrupt lurch, and the deck tipped 2 degrees left. Ramsey caught the tail in front of his board. Caught the rail in front of his board. What the...
The tow, said Bonnet. Current's playing with it.
I felt it nudge us when we sat down, said Ramsey. But the bumpers... They lurched another degree to the left.
Just pray it doesn't drag us off this mountain, said Bonnet. We couldn't take the extra 500 feet.
How do you know? Asked Ramsey. He studied the search board.
I feel the mountain under my feet all foggy.
Ramsey looked up. What did you say?
I feel all foggy in the head, said Bonnet.
He leaned against the grab rail.
Fall off the mountain. Hate the fog.
He forced himself upright.
Not thinking straight. Take over, Mr. Ramsey. I'm...
He sat down on the deck, one hand above him still clinging to the rail. An abrupt correlation interlocked in Ramsey's mind. He glanced one more time over his search board, turned away, forced himself to walk calmly across to Bonnet. He bent over the first officer, checked Bonnet's vampire gauge. CO2 diffusion .228, above normal by .016. He dropped Bonnet's wrist, stood up, and made a minute micrometer gauge reduction in the anhydrase generation. And with that, I am going to call it for the day. Thank you, Warren Steele, for tuning in, even if it was only briefly. Hope you enjoy listening when you get around to me finishing, which is probably in the next several minutes. Hope people are digging it. That was the third installment, I think, we've done of Under Pressure. Alternatively, The Dragon in the Sea by Frank Herbert, the man, the myth, the legend. Let's see. Probably another 2, maybe 3. I'm going to assume for now 3 more installments, so about 6, I'm guessing, installments is what we're looking at, which is fine. That's about what I'd hoped, I guess. 5 would have been ideal, but my time's been limited, so it's okay. After I'm done with this one, I'll probably do another session of short stories, probably gleaned from either Project Gutenberg or one of the other sites and resources that I use for my short story readings. After that, I'm thinking maybe Starfish by Peter Watts. There's a bunch of other stuff I'd also like to read. I'd kind of like to have a big name book read aloud, so I'm thinking probably Armor by John Stakely before the end of the year. Which is kind of like Starship Troopers if you had less monologuing on the relative virtues of a military meritocracy. Take from that what you will. The only difficulty with doing Armor is I feel sort of compelled to do Starship Troopers before that. We'll see. Let me get through this book, short stories, and then maybe probably Starfish, and then we'll see where we're at timing-wise for the rest of the year, and figure it out from there. Because Starfish isn't super long, but it's long enough that that's going to be a couple weeks. Alrighty. With that, I'm going to scooch. I do this every week on Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. Right now, we finished our 3rd installment of Under Pressure by Frank Herbert. I also do other streams throughout the week. I have a Mecha Mondays, where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. Next week we'll be doing some of SD Gundam Battle Alliance, a sort of giant robot game that came out just a day or 2 ago. I also have a Warframe Wednesdays stream where I do Warframe for a couple hours. All of those start at noon Eastern Standard Time, usually. Give or take a couple minutes. I've been like 10 minutes late for the last several, but hopefully I'll get
my collective crap together, and it won't be an issue anymore. That'd be great.
But yeah, hope to see more people next time, or any people next time. If not, no problem. They're all up on YouTube for your perusal whenever. But yeah, I'm fairly regular. Alrighty. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. See you all next time. Bye.